consequences to her life. This is a huge problem in our country. It's estimated that over 10 million people abuse their pain prescriptions, 2 million are addicted to opioids, and 70,000 people will die every year of overdoses. Jody is presently a student at Whatcom Community College, studying the substance abuse professional program. And so Jody, if you come and tell us your story, please.
Thank you. I share my journey of opioid addiction through narrative storytelling in an effort to convey a message of resiliency and hope. Sometimes humorous, sometimes emotional. You do have permission to laugh. And during the Q&A that is to follow, there is no question that is off limits. You can ask me anything. Anytime you see a turtle up on top of a fence post, you know he had some help. I had come across this parable when I was in jail, but I never really knew what it meant. I would later find out Alex Haley, the author of Roots, had a picture of a turtle on a fence post hanging on his wall. When asked about it, he replied, "Every time I write something significant, every time I read my words and think that they are wonderful and begin to feel proud of myself, I look at the turtle on a fence post and remember that he didn't get up there on his own. He had help." My name is Jody Borelli. I'm a recovering drug addict. My addiction began after a shoulder injury and pain medication prescribed by my doctor. I went from soccer mom and PTA president to heroin addict living on the streets of Tacoma and making an appearance on Washington's Most Wanted. Addiction stole the beautiful life I once had. Prior to my addiction, I was a stay-at-home mom, and this was my identity. My children and my family were everything to me. My kids would come home from school to the smell of fresh-baked cookies. I was the neighborhood mom, too. My yard was the baseball field, the football field, and the basketball court, depending on the day. Safety was also a priority for me. This had earned me the reputation as a helmet enforcer in my neighborhood. All the kids knew that if they were riding around without their helmets on, that their parents would be coming to retrieve their bikes from me. I was actively involved in every aspect of my children's lives, and my weekends often revolved around the sport of the season. My addiction began after a shoulder injury, and I had detached my labrum while coaching my son's Little League baseball team. I was prescribed pain medication by my doctor, and my life was forever changed. The pills worked, but as I numbed the pain, I also numbed out all the joy in my life. Eventually, I couldn't tell the difference between joy and pain, and my life deteriorated rapidly. I didn't recognize addiction as it overtook me. I'd had multiple ER visits for stomach issues, which I now know to be withdrawal. I had my gallbladder removed for the love of surgeries and pain pills to follow, and I had faked multiple surgeries with the doctor who was prescribing me my pain pills. In 2009, I completed treatment at Residence 12 in Kirkland for a Vicodin addiction. My second attempt at treatment was at Sundown M Ranch, and at this point I had progressed to OxyContin. I had left treatment early, and 3 days later I had a needle in my arm and a new love for heroin. Once my addiction had progressed to IV drug use, the shame was unbearable. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't allow my children to see me that way. They were everything to me, and I left them because of my addiction. Angelina, my baby, was 12 and still clinging to my apron strings. She was my little shadow. Joseph, 13, always my little protector, and the one I had coached for years in Little League baseball. Jaden was 17, old enough to understand, and the one who had always held out hope. The devastation that followed was horrific. Existing only to use, I lost myself in the grit of trap houses, stealing to support my habit, living in constant fear, and always on the run. I was the epitome of hopelessness. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. Suffering in ways beyond comprehension. Waking up, coming to, mad as hell that I even woke up because it meant that I had to endure the misery for yet another day. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. Many ask, how can this happen? No one chooses to be a drug addict, yet addiction is the disease of choice. The area of the brain responsible for decision-making is diseased. Nobody faults the Alzheimer's patient for forgetting their keys. Why do we blame the addict for making poor choices? The area of the brain responsible for decision-making is diseased. Looking back, the progression of my addiction was not gradual, and at no point was it ever manageable. From the first time the needle hit my vein, the pendulum was in the pit, methodically cutting away at every part of me. Reduced down to the bare necessities, I was consumed by the cycle of addiction. Life consisted of stealing and using to avoid being dope sick. The hurt was unbearable, but there was relief in the needle. There was relief in the needle, but the hurt was unbearable. On the streets, girls typically have two options in order to survive. You either sell yourself or acquire items to sell, also known as boosting. Prior to my addiction, I had been an avid Nordstrom shopper, and I knew high-end women's products. So, every drug dealer has a main girl and a bunch of side girls, and I saw the opportunity. What a better way to keep all of your girlfriends happy than with makeup, perfume, and various high-end women's products. This was my hustle, which had earned me the illustrious title of Ulta Thief on Washington's Most Wanted, Capture 805. Over the course of 4 years, I was booked into jail over 20 times. I was once arrested for stealing a pint of Haagen-Dazs coffee ice cream. They should have called me the Coffee Bandit, as I was always known on the streets for having an endless supply of coffee Haagen-Dazs minis in my purse at all times. I recall the arresting officer distinctly. It was the first and probably the only time an officer had genuinely expressed concern for my well-being. He treated me like a human and not some strung-out junkie. I remember the entire conversation, but what I couldn't shake was when he asked me, "Don't you want more out of life?" Through his kindness, his words had imprinted on me and a seed was planted. He still took me to jail, and that is where I spent my 40th birthday. Detoxing in jail is miserable. But what's worse is ending up in the hole on suicide watch while detoxing. And that's what happens when you climb over the rail and threaten to jump off the second tier at Pierce County Jail. You end up in a cell, alone, wearing the nice comfy turtle suit, or the suicide suit. Eventually I was released, but that wouldn't last long. So, 2 police officers walk into a Nordstrom rack. Now my response seems perfectly logical at the time. I did what any addict with stolen merchandise and a pesky warrant would do. I dove into the nearest clothing rounder. A grown woman hiding in a clothing rounder, playing hide-and-go-seek. Not a fun ride to jail. The worst part was when the officer told me that they weren't even looking for me, but that hiding in the clothing rounder seemed mighty suspicious. He went on to say that if it wasn't for the toddler trying to climb in after me, they would have never even seen me. During those 4 years on the streets, I was court ordered to attend treatment multiple times. During one intake session, to say it went bad would be an understatement. I walked into my assessment with a big blue rubber tie-off still wrapped around my arm, having just shot up in the parking lot. As soon as I was out of there, I had reached an absolute new low. I was taken to a new drug dealer's house to get well, and a teenager of about 16 had answered the door. And he stared at me for a long time before finally saying, "You're Joseph's mom, aren't you?" He was a kid from my baseball team that I had coached years before. I had driven him to practice many times. He had played in my yard and even ate Otter Pops on my front porch. Addiction doesn't discriminate. It takes the young and the old, and once it takes hold, escape from addiction is often elusive. However, I would like to say that this young man just recently completed treatment. I wasn't surprised that I ended up on Washington's Most Wanted, but what did surprise me was that the camera really does add 10 pounds and that horizontal stripes are not your friend on TV. Living on the streets during this time was horrific. The constant fear and anxiety was exhausting. Word had spread fast after my television debut, and I was hearing the buzz. It was like I was being circled by sharks. Not only did I have the cops looking for me because of that pesky warrant, I had dealers, drug addicts, and so-called friends trying to kidnap me and cash in on the ransom. Not the ransom, cash in on the bounty. Eventually, I was turned in for the bounty. On day 7 of detoxing, I woke up to 4 police officers standing over me. I was hurt, angry, and lost. The epitome of hopelessness. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. I had overdosed many times, been in and out of jails and hospitals. I had suffered endocarditis, an infection in my heart, and had had an infection that should have left me an amputee. Escape no longer possible, I was desperate. I was rapidly losing my mind, my body, and my battle with addiction. Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Desperate Ground. Upon desperate ground, or as it were, sitting in a leaking boat, or lying in a burning house. You will survive if you fight quickly, and perish if you do not. On December 2nd, 2016, shortly after being released from jail, I moved to Bellingham with a duffel bag of clothes, 11 teeth in my head, and a ferocious attitude. I was in desperate need of help. I was ordered to attend intensive outpatient treatment at Catholic Community Services as part of probation. This is where my recovery begins and I start to heal. I was pulled up from depths unimaginable. Despite my rough exterior, my counselor at CCS treated me with respect and dignity. I was shown empathy despite my hostility and given compassion in exchange for vulgarity. I was so broken. I am grateful for that counselor who provided me with the hope that I so desperately needed until I was able to find my inner light. A transformation began to occur as my recovery started to grow roots. I found employment for the first time in years, but working at a gas station felt hopeless. Never underestimate the power of a planted seed. I remembered those words from that kind police officer years before. Don't you want more out of life? I wanted fulfillment, but I was apprehensive about everything, and I lacked confidence. During a one-on-one, it was my counselor who had suggested that I would be a good fit for the substance use disorder professional program at Whatcom Community College, and shortly thereafter I had applied and was accepted as part of the first graduating cohort. I heard it said one time that the difference between who you are today and who you will be 5 years from now is the people you meet and the books you read. I'm not the same person that I was 3 years ago. I'm grateful for the opportunities that I've had to learn, to grow, to be challenged, and to be encouraged. Today, my passion is to become a public speaker. My heart's desire is to shine light on the disease of addiction, but more specifically, the opioid epidemic, and to bring addiction up out of the darkness. The famous French poet, Victor Hugo, once said, "He who opens a school door closes a prison." I didn't know what I wanted when I went back to school, but I knew what I didn't want, and I had motivation. Being labeled a drug addict has always been a huge barrier for me. Coupled with being on Washington's Most Wanted, it was devastating. I'm not embarrassed about my story anymore, and I don't regret the past. Now I have the opportunity to share my story and hopefully inspire others. Today, my youngest is in her first year of college. My children call me. They tell me that they love me and that they are proud of me. I have been given a second chance at life. Many ask, why is the turtle on top of the fence post? My answer is this, because this is where she is happiest. My first public speaking engagement was back in December at the Catholic Community Services Christmas party. After I spoke, it was Roland who was the first person to come and talk to me afterwards. He had invited me to come here and speak, to share my story with the Rotary Club. Thank you, Roland, for making my first public speaking engagement so memorable, and for allowing me this opportunity to share my story here with you all. I would also like to thank the city of Bellingham for welcoming me and showing me a quality of life that I never thought possible. It's a beautiful city. In June, I graduate from the Substance Use Disorder Professional Program with a 4.0 GPA. I am pursuing a public speaking career to share my story and to provide hope to others. I currently have several speaking engagements on the calendar. And just 2 weeks ago, I was honored with the ACT Transforming Lives Award in Olympia. Quite an accomplishment. I had a meal provided by the state of Washington that was not served with an orange jail sport. This is transformation, and I love my life today. Thank you.